I woke up around 2 a.m. with drywall dust still in my hair and the work light in the hall still plugged into an orange extension cord. I'd been sleeping on an air mattress in the main bedroom, boots beside me, utility knife and tape measure on the floor where I dropped them. The cough came from the spare bedroom. It was dry, short, and familiar. My father had coughed like that for years, usually after climbing stairs or getting up too fast from his chair. Dad? I sat up before I remembered where I was. That room was supposed to be for my parents once I finished cleaning and fixing the place. They hadn't even seen the house yet. They'd never stepped through the front door. I walked down the hall and pushed the spare room open. Nobody was inside. On the folding table by the bed frame, there were two glasses of water. One was mine. The other sat near the edge of the bed, exactly where my father would have put it. I started looking at houses after almost 9 years of working nights in Erie. Mostly maintenance work, loading dock doors, bad thermostats, freezer alarms, busted light fixtures, leaking sinks in employee bathrooms. If something broke after regular hours and nobody wanted to wait until morning, I was usually the guy with the tool bag and the key ring. It wasn't a bad job. It paid steady enough if I took the overtime, and I took almost all of it. I got used to eating dinner out of gas station bags, sleeping when other people were driving to work, and keeping spare socks in my truck because some nights a pipe would go and I'd spend 3 hours standing in water. That kind of work doesn't make you rich, but if you're careful, it lets you put a little away. I was careful for a long time. My father, David, and my mother, Elaine, were still renting a small place on the east side of town. It had old windows, a narrow driveway, and a furnace that kicked on with a bang every winter. My mother always said they were fine. She said it the same way every time, like if she kept her voice even enough, I'd stop checking the baseboards when I came over. My father didn't complain much either. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his coffee, cough into his fist, and wave me off before I could ask about it. The cough had been around for years. Dry, quick, stubborn. He said it was nothing. Dust, weather, age, whatever answer would get me to stop watching him. But I'd notice how long it took him to stand up from the table. I'd notice the unpaid repair slips stuck under the magnet on the fridge. I'd notice my mother lowering the thermostat and putting on another sweater. Their rent went up twice in 3 years. After the second increase, saving stopped feeling like a habit and started feeling like a deadline. I wanted a place where they didn't have to ask a landlord before fixing a railing. A place where my father could sit near a window that actually sealed in February. A place where my mother could plant something without wondering if they'd still be there next spring. I wasn't looking for anything big. 2 bedrooms, working heat, a driveway that wouldn't turn into a sheet of ice, and enough room for my parents to have their own space. Monica called me on a Tuesday morning after my shift while I was still sitting in my truck outside the warehouse with the engine running. I remember I had a coffee cooling in the cup holder and a service invoice folded in my jacket pocket. "It needs a little work, but for this price, Jacob, it won't sit long," Monica told me. The house was on the southern edge of Erie, not far from Mill Creek Township. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, small garage, narrow backyard. The listing photos were plain: fresh paint, light-colored walls, cheap new flooring in the living room, older cabinets wiped down until they looked better than they probably were. It looked like the kind of house people fixed just enough to sell. The price was lower than I expected. Not impossible. Just low enough that I asked Monica twice if there was a lien, a foundation issue, anything buried in the disclosures. She said the seller wanted it moved fast and the inspection would tell me what I needed to know. I drove by before I even went home to sleep. The house sat back from the road with a short driveway and a patchy front lawn. The siding needed washing. One gutter sagged near the garage. The backyard fence leaned in one corner. Those were normal problems. I stood there in my work boots, still smelling like machine oil and cold coffee, and started counting what I'd have to fix before bringing my parents over. When I told my mother, she got quiet first. Then she asked about the payment, the taxes, the utilities, all the things I knew she'd ask. "You're sure you can afford this?" My mother asked. "I can make it work, Mom," I said. I signed the paperwork before the end of that week. The plan was simple. I'd take a few days off, clean the place, fix what needed fixing, set up the spare bedroom, and then bring my parents over to see it. I remember thinking the hard part was finally behind us. Monica met me at the house the next morning with the keys in a plain white envelope. She walked me through the place one more time, mostly pointing out the things I already knew from the inspection report. Loose outlet in the living room. Garage door sensor needed adjusting. Water pressure was fine, but the washer hookup had a slow drip if the valve wasn't turned all the way. "Call me if anything from the paperwork looks off," Monica said. I told her I would, then stood in the living room after she left and listened to the house settle around me. Morning traffic was thin out there. A delivery truck passed once. Somewhere across the road, somebody's dog barked at nothing for about 10 seconds and quit. The place smelled like fresh paint and old carpet padding. The seller had replaced flooring in the living room and hallway, but the bedroom still had older laminate with a few soft spots near the walls. I walked the rooms the way I'd walk a site at work, checking the outlets, looking under sinks, opening cabinets, testing switches twice. I made a list on the back of a receipt because I'd forgotten my notebook in the truck. I brought in what I needed first: tool bag, drill case, 2 5-gallon buckets, a box of cleaning supplies, drop cloths, light bulbs, outlet covers, a pack of cheap white switch plates, my air mattress, a duffel bag with clothes, then a few boxes I didn't want sitting in the truck overnight. I took the main bedroom for myself because it was closer to the bathroom and had the better outlet placement. The spare bedroom was smaller, but it got better light during the day. I figured my parents wouldn't care about square footage as long as the room was clean, warm, and easy to move around in. I put 2 pillows still sealed in plastic against the wall and unfolded a cheap table near the bed frame parts I hadn't assembled yet. A couple of bags from the store went in the corner, still tied at the handles. Most of that first day went into basic work. I swapped 2 cracked outlet covers, tightened the loose handle on the back door, cleaned dust out of the kitchen drawers, and scraped old tape from the inside of the bathroom cabinet. Nothing exciting, just the kind of annoying work that takes longer than it should, because every time you finish one thing, you notice 3 more. By evening, my knees hurt from going up and down off the floor, and my hands smell like cleaner no matter how many times I wash them. I ate a sandwich over the sink because I didn't have chairs in the kitchen yet. After that, I walked through the house again with a flashlight, the same way I check a building before I lock up on night shift. Back door latched, garage side door latched, front window locks down, bathroom fan off, hall light on. I slept on the air mattress in the main bedroom with my phone charging from an extension cord. The house made noise after midnight, but old houses do that. A faint scratch moved somewhere inside the wall near the living room, stopped, then started again lower down. I lay there and listened long enough to decide it was probably a mouse, maybe 2. I'd dealt with worse in warehouse break rooms. A little later, there was a soft knock from the living room, right around where the old sofa sat against the wall. One knock, then another after a long pause. I opened my eyes and stared at the doorway. Jesus Christ. I got up, grabbed the flashlight, and checked. The sofa was still there. The front door was locked. The blinds weren't moving. I stood there in socks, annoyed more than anything, waiting for the sound to repeat. It didn't. The floor creaked under my heel when I shifted my weight, and that gave me enough of an answer. Wood, pipes, wind, something in the wall. The place had been empty long enough. Houses make noise when people start using them again. I went back to bed and slept badly, but I slept. The next morning I started with the living room. The old sofa had come with the house because the seller didn't want to haul it off, and I'd been planning to drag it out to the curb once I had help. Until then, I needed to clean behind it. Dust had collected along the baseboard in a thick gray line, and there were a few dead bugs under one leg. I pushed the sofa forward a few inches, then had to stop because something scraped between the back of it and the wall. I thought it was a piece of trim breaking loose. I leaned over, reached down, and pulled out a small pocket notebook. It had a soft cover, dark blue or maybe black before age and dust got to it. No name on the front, no sticker, no brand I could see. It was the kind of notebook somebody might keep in a glove compartment or shirt pocket. I flipped it open with one thumb while standing there with the broom still in my other hand. The first page had 5 lines written in ballpoint pen. Don't sleep in a room you haven't cleaned yourself. If you find something in the house that isn't yours, don't use it and don't put it where it looks like it belongs. After midnight, don't answer knocking from inside the walls. If a room looks different from the way you left it, close the door and don't check it twice. Don't make a room ready for someone who hasn't stepped inside yet. I read them once, then read the last one again because it was such a strange thing to write down. The handwriting wasn't neat, but it wasn't childish either. A few words looked darker than the others, like someone had gone over them more than once. I stood there for maybe half a minute, looking from the page to the sofa and back to the page. I had baseboards to clean and a leaky washer valve to check. People leave weird things in houses. Kids write weird things. Previous owners get bored. Somebody probably thought it was funny to make a little haunted house list and shove it where the next person might find it. I closed the notebook, carried it into the kitchen, and dropped it into the trash with the used paper towels and paint tape. I went back out before noon because I'd already found more small things than I'd planned for. That always happens when you start working on a place. You go in for light bulbs and outlet covers, then you remember the windows need curtains, the bathroom needs a real bath mat, and nobody should move into a room with one working lamp and no place to set a glass of water. I drove to a big box store off Peach Street and filled a cart without thinking too hard about it. LED bulbs, a pack of white outlet plates, cheap gray curtains, 2 curtain rods, cleaning cloths, a small bottle of pain cream because my father used the same kind at home, a bottle of aspirin, a folded blanket that was softer than it needed to be, 2 drinking glasses from a clearance shelf. I stood there for a minute holding them, checking for chips along the rims like I was inspecting parts at work. I bought them because they were heavy enough not to tip over too easily. Back at the house, I unloaded everything through the front door and left the receipt on the kitchen counter. I had my phone wedged between my shoulder and ear while I cut open packaging with my utility knife. My mother picked up on the 3rd ring. She asked about the drive, the house, the neighborhood, the heat, the bathroom, the kind of questions she asked when she didn't want to ask the bigger one yet. I gave her the short version while I carried a bag of supplies down the hall. "When can we come see it?" my mother asked. "Give me a few days," I said. "I'm getting your room ready." I said it from the hallway right outside the spare bedroom. I remember that because I had one hand on the door frame and the other holding the bag with the pain cream and the new glasses in it. My mother made a small please sound, the kind she tried to hide when she didn't want me spending money on her. Then she asked if I was eating real food or just coffee and gas station sandwiches. I lied and told her I was fine. After we hung up, I went back to work. The room was small enough that every decision mattered. I put the cheap metal bed frame together first, tightening the bolts by hand before giving each one a final turn with the wrench. I set the pillows on it, opened the blanket, and shook it out to get rid of the plastic smell. I cleared the top drawer of the dresser the seller had left behind, wiped it twice, and lined it with paper towels because I hadn't bought drawer liner yet. I set the folding table near the wall where my father could reach it from the bed without standing. Then I moved it 3 inches because the outlet was on the wrong side. That was how most of the afternoon went. Measure, move, clean, Check. I replaced the cracked outlet plate by the bedroom door. I tightened the loose screws in the closet hinge. I tested the window lock, didn't like how it caught, sprayed it, worked it back and forth until it moved clean. The sun shifted across the room while I worked, and by evening the spare bedroom looked less like a storage space and more like a room waiting on furniture. I didn't think of it any other way. Around 8:30 p.m., I was in the living room packing up the tool bag when the knocking started again behind the sofa. Same area as the night before, but clearer this time. 3 taps, low in the wall, then a pause, then 3 more. I stood with a screwdriver in my hand and looked at the back of the sofa. When a noise repeats clean like that, I try to match it to a system: compressor cycle, loose duct, water hammer, expansion in the lines. I waited for the furnace to kick on, or the refrigerator to hum, or a pipe to answer from the kitchen. Nothing matched it. The taps came again. I moved the sofa forward and put my ear near the wall. Not touching it, the sound stopped. I stayed there a few seconds longer, then straightened up and told myself I'd check for pests in the morning. I'd already had enough of crawling around with a flashlight for one day. I was turning off lights room by room when I noticed the spare bedroom door sitting half open. I knew I'd left it wider than that. I'd been carrying things in and out all afternoon, and the door tended to swing toward the wall unless I pulled it nearly shut. I pushed it open with 2 fingers and reached for the switch. For a second, I thought the room was how I'd left it. Then I saw the chair beside the folding table. It was small, plain, and worn smooth along the front edge of the seat. The finish had gone dull on the arms. It looked like something that had spent years in a kitchen or next to a bed. It was placed at an angle, close enough to the table that someone sitting there could set down a glass without reaching. What the hell? I didn't step all the way in at first. I just stood with my hands still on the light switch, going through the afternoon in my head. I hadn't brought in a chair. There were no chairs in the house except the broken metal one in the garage, and this wasn't that. I hadn't seen it in the closet. I hadn't pulled it from behind the sofa. It hadn't been leaning in the hallway. I looked at the chair, then at the 2 new glasses still sitting in their cardboard sleeve on the folding table. The notebook came back to me in pieces. Not the whole thing, just the second rule, or what I could remember of it. If you find something in the house that isn't yours, don't use it. Don't put it where it looks like it belongs. I backed out of the room and left the chair where it was. In the kitchen, the trash can was almost full. Paper towels, paint tape, plastic wrap, packaging from the outlet plates, the empty sleeve from the blanket. I pulled the bag open and started digging. The notebook wasn't on top anymore. I had thrown more trash over it all day. Come on, come on. I pushed aside damp paper towels and strips of blue tape until my fingers hit the soft cover near the bottom of the bag. I pulled it out with a smear of dust and coffee grounds stuck to one corner, then wiped it on my jeans and opened it under the kitchen light. I stood at the kitchen counter with the notebook open under the light and read every line again, slower than I had the first time. I had to wipe one corner of the page with my sleeve because coffee grounds from the trash had stuck to it. The ink had bled a little on the edges where the paper was soft, but the words were still clear enough. The second rule was the one I kept going back to. If you find something in the house that isn't yours, don't use it and don't put it where it looks like it belongs. That chair in the spare bedroom looked like it belonged there. It was the right height for the folding table. It was turned just enough toward the bed to look like somebody had been sitting there, keeping water or medicine close by. If it had been upside down in the closet or stacked in the garage, I could have talked myself into a bad memory. Maybe the seller left it. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I walked past it 6 times without seeing it. The way it sat by the table didn't give me much room for any of those answers. I kept reading. After midnight, don't answer knocking from inside the walls. The last rule still made the least sense to me. Don't make a room ready for someone who hasn't stepped inside yet. I looked toward the hallway when I read it, then looked back down before I could think too much about the spare bedroom. At that point, I was still treating it like a weird warning about old furniture or old rooms, the kind of things somebody wrote after getting spooked in a house with thin walls and bad pipes. I took the notebook with me and went back down the hall. The spare bedroom door was still open from when I backed out. The overhead light was on. The chair was still beside the folding table, but it wasn't angled the same way anymore. I stopped in the doorway and checked the floor, because that's what I do when equipment moves at work. You look for wheel marks, drag marks, a cord under tension, anything that explains the shift. There were no marks in the dust. The chair had turned toward the door. Only a little, maybe 15 degrees. Enough that if someone had been sitting in it, their knees would have pointed toward me. I didn't go in. I stood outside the threshold and looked at the notebook again. Don't use it. Don't put it where it looks like it belongs. So I did nothing. I didn't touch the chair. I didn't move the table. I didn't grab the two glasses still in their cardboard sleeve. I reached in just far enough to flip the light switch off, then pulled the door closed. The latch didn't catch the first time. I pushed until it clicked. After that, I tried to keep moving. I cleaned up the kitchen, tied off the trash bag, checked the back door, checked the front door, checked the garage. I did the same circuit twice because my head wouldn't settle. At work, when a freezer alarm keeps tripping or a loading door won't stay shut, I don't stand around staring at it. I go through the list: power, sensor, hinge, seal, reset, start over if it doesn't make sense. I treated the house the same way because I didn't have anything better. Around 11:40 p.m., I was sitting on the air mattress with my boots still on, the notebook on the floor beside my phone. I had the hall light on and the bedroom door open. The old sofa was still against the living room wall, pushed out a few inches from where I'd cleaned behind it. At midnight, nothing happened. A little after 12:20 a.m., the knocking started. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps again. It came from inside the wall behind the sofa, not from the front door, not from the window, not from the side of the house. I could tell because outside knocks have space around them. They carry through glass or wood. This was dull and close, like knuckles hitting the other side of drywall. I got up and took a few steps into the hall. The taps came again. My mouth opened before I made a decision. It was the normal thing to do. You hear a knock, you ask who's there. The first word was already halfway out when I looked down and saw the notebook open on the floor where I'd left it. Oh, shit. I shut my mouth so hard my teeth clicked. The knocking stopped. I stood there with one hand on the door frame, breathing through my nose, waiting. My phone screen was black on the floor behind me. The house light in the hallway made the living room look flat and cheap, all fresh paint and bare baseboard. Nothing moved. Then the knocking came again, but not from behind the sofa. It came from farther down the hall. 3 taps from inside the wall beside the spare bedroom. I didn't move toward it. I kept my hand on the door frame and listened. The taps repeated once, then shifted lower, close to the floor. After that came a different sound from inside the spare room. Fabric sliding, plastic crinkling, a soft pull, then a stop, then another pull. I knew what that sounded like. I'd spent half the day opening bedding and cutting packaging. It sounded like someone taking the blanket out and spreading it. I stayed where I was until my legs started to ache. The sound went on in short pieces. No footsteps, no voice, just the movement of fabric, the faint creak of the floor near the wall, and once a light scrape from the folding table. Every few minutes I checked the time on my phone without picking it up. 1:08 a.m., 1:31 a.m., 2:04 a.m. Sometime close to morning, it stopped. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the edge of the air mattress with the notebook in my lap and watched the hall lighten by a few shades. When the room was bright enough that I didn't need the overhead light, I walked to the spare bedroom. The door was still closed. I opened it with 2 fingers on the knob. The chair was gone. The two pillows were no longer in plastic. They had been taken out and placed side by side on the temporary bed frame, with the new blanket pulled up beneath them. The empty plastic sleeves were folded flat on the floor beside the wall. I stood there long enough for the furnace to click on behind me. God damn it! The third day should have been the day I stepped back and called somebody. An inspector, an exterminator, maybe Monica. I knew that. I'd slept maybe an hour sitting up against the wall, and when I stood, my knees popped loud enough that I heard them over the furnace. Instead, I made coffee in a paper cup and started checking the house like it was one more overnight maintenance problem. That was easier than making a bigger decision. I'd already signed. I'd already moved tools in. I'd already told my mother I was getting the room ready. Walking away over a chair, a notebook, and some knocking in the walls sounded ridiculous when the sun was up, and the place looked like a half-finished project again. I started with the locks. Front door first, deadbolt moved clean. Strike plate was a little loose, so I tightened both screws. Back door next. The latch sat low, but it caught if I lifted the knob while closing it. Garage side door stuck at the bottom because the weather strip was old. I trimmed a torn piece off with my utility knife and made a note to replace it. Windows were next. Living room, kitchen, both bedrooms. Locked from the inside. No marks on the sills. No fresh scratches. No footprints outside under the windows. Just old leaves pressed into damp soil and the same tire tracks from my truck in the driveway. I checked the garage, too. Broken metal chair in the corner. Rake, paint tray, a cracked plastic bin with nothing in it. No old wooden chair, no spare furniture, no hidden crawl space door, at least not one I could see. I tapped along the wall behind the sofa with the handle of a screwdriver and got a hollow sound in two spots. But that didn't mean much. Bad drywall work can do that. Old framing can do that. A mouse run can do that. I kept looking for the answer that would let me stay. By noon, I had the notebook on the kitchen counter, held open with a roll of painter's tape. I copied the rules onto a sheet of cardboard with a marker, the way I'd write a shutdown checklist at work. Big letters, no guessing. Then I taped it to the wall across from the hall, where I'd see it every time I walked past the bedrooms. The first rule was simple enough. I cleaned my own room again, moved the air mattress, swept under it, wiped the baseboards, checked the closet, shook out the drop cloth I'd been using near the door. If there had been anything left in there from before, I wanted it gone. The spare bedroom I didn't clean again. That bothered me, but the fourth rule had me thinking too much about checking things twice. I looked from the doorway only. The pillows were still on the temporary bed frame. The blanket was still pulled up under them. The folding table was where I'd left it. The two new glasses were still in the cardboard sleeve. The chair was still gone. I kept waiting for that to make me feel better. It didn't. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing small jobs and stopping every few minutes to listen. I replaced the loose outlet in the living room. I tightened the towel bar in the bathroom. I cleared paint flakes out of the kitchen window track. Whenever I passed the spare bedroom, I kept my eyes on the hall wall instead of looking in. That felt stupid in daylight. I did it anyway. Before dark, I walked through the house and set things up like a routine. Phone charge, flashlight on the kitchen counter, notebook beside it, hall light on, bedroom door open, front and back doors checked, garage checked, trash bag tied and put outside because I didn't want the notebook ending up in there again by accident. I had started treating the rules like a machine procedure. Don't touch what isn't mine. Don't answer knocking. Close a change room and leave it alone. Simple enough if I stayed awake and didn't let myself react too fast. That night around 10:15 p.m., I noticed the smell first. I was walking past the spare bedroom with a roll of paper towels under my arm when it reached the hall. Pain cream, the sharp menthol kind my father rubbed into his hands when the weather changed. I stopped outside the door. The smell was strongest near the gap at the bottom. I knew I'd bought a bottle the day before. It was still in the plastic store bag on the folding table, unopened. I remembered seeing it there. I remembered because the label was turned outward when I set the bag down. I put the paper towels on the floor and looked at the cardboard checklist taped to the wall. If a room looks different from the way you left it, close the door and don't check it twice. The spare bedroom door was already mostly closed. I pushed it until the latch clicked. I didn't look inside. I went back to the kitchen and washed my hands even though there was nothing on them. After midnight, the knocking came back. This time I didn't get up right away. I sat on the edge of the air mattress with the notebook in my lap and counted. 3 taps from the wall behind the sofa. Long pause, 3 taps again. Then nothing for almost a minute. The sound moved to the hall wall next. I kept my mouth shut. A little after 12:40 a.m., something brushed the outside of my bedroom door frame. Soft, cloth against paint. I had left the door open so I could see the hallway light, the strip of baseboard, the taped-up cardboard with the rules on it. Nothing crossed the doorway. When I finally stepped out, there was a hand towel on the floor in the hall. It was white, old, and damp enough to darken the wood-look flooring under it. The ends were folded over each other like somebody had wrung it out and set it down carefully. It wasn't one of mine. I'd bought blue shop towels and paper towels, no white hand towels. I stood over it for a while, with my hands half raised like I was afraid I might pick it up out of habit. That's how ordinary it looked. A wet towel on the floor is a thing you deal with. You grab it, toss it in a sink, check where the water came from. I didn't touch it. I backed into my bedroom and waited. The towel stayed there until 1:30 a.m. At some point after that, while I was looking down at my phone, it was gone. No sound, no movement I caught. Just gone when I looked up again. That was the first time I trusted the rules more than my own habits. If I didn't interact, things stopped. If I didn't answer, the knocking moved on. If I closed the door before looking too closely, the room stayed contained. It wasn't good, but it was manageable in the same ugly way a failing system is manageable when you know which breaker trips and which valve sticks. Around 2 a.m., the spare bedroom door opened. I heard the click first, then a slow scrape from the latch plate. I knew that door. I had pushed it shut earlier with my own hand. I'd heard it catch. The door eased open about 2 inches and stopped. Not again. I stayed in the hall 5 or 6 feet away and kept my eyes on the door frame instead of the gap. The menthol smell was back, stronger now, mixed with something like old soap. The kind of bar soap my parents kept in a dish by the bathroom sink because my mother bought the same brand every time it went on sale. I reached out with the end of a broom handle and pushed the door closed from a distance. It clicked. I waited. Nothing pushed back. The rest of the night went in pieces. I sat, stood, checked the time, listened, walked to the kitchen, walked back. The knocking came once more around 3:10 a.m. from low in the wall beside the spare room. I didn't answer. It stopped after 3 rounds. Near morning, the house went back to small, regular sounds. The furnace ran. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Tires wet on pavement. When light came through the bedroom blinds, I checked the hall. No towel. The spare bedroom door was closed. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first. I washed the cup I'd used, then washed it again because my hands needed something to do. After that, I stood in front of the taped cardboard and read the rules from top to bottom. The night had gone by without anything getting worse because I had followed them. That was what I told myself. Still, the part I kept avoiding was the kind of things the house had chosen. Pain cream, old soap, a damp towel, a room with 2 pillows waiting in it. None of it looked random when I let myself think about it, so I stopped thinking about it and went outside to get air. The neighbor who had stared at the house the day I moved in lived 2 doors down. I had seen him once by his mailbox, watching longer than people usually watch a new owner unload tools. By breakfast time, I knew I needed to find him. I found the neighbor a little after 8 a.m. when I was carrying my trash bin back from the curb. He was 2 houses down, standing by his mailbox in a faded ball cap and a brown jacket, sorting envelopes with one hand and holding a mug in the other. He had the kind of yard that told me he did most of his own work. Trimmed shrubs, a hose coiled properly, garage door closed all the way, no gap at the bottom. I knew he'd seen me before I crossed the street. He looked up once, then looked back down at his mail like he hadn't. His name was Bruce. He had told me that the first day I unloaded tools, back when the conversation was still just names, weather, and which trash day the street used. I didn't know him well enough to use it like we were friends, so I started with the neighbor routine. Said morning, asked if I was catching him at a bad time. He gave me half a shrug and kept the mug close to his chest. I asked if he had a minute. He looked past me toward my house before he answered. That told me enough to stop pretending this was about property lines or trash pickup. You knew something was wrong with that house, didn't you? I asked. He didn't answer right away. A car went by behind me, slow, tires hissing over wet pavement. Bruce watched it pass like he was waiting for the sound to cover whatever he might say. Then he tucked the mail under his arm and looked at the house again. I know people don't stay, Bruce said. That was the first straight thing anybody had told me about the place. I asked how many people he meant. He made a small motion with his hand, like he'd lost count or didn't want to give me a number he'd have to stand behind. He said the house had changed hands a few times, more than it should have. Sometimes it sat empty for months. Sometimes somebody came in, fixed a few things, stayed less than a week. Then the sign went back up. He said it all in a flat way, like a man explaining a bad intersection where everyone in the neighborhood knew to slow down. I asked if anybody had called police. He said not that he knew of. I asked if there had been break-ins. He said no. He asked me if I'd checked the locks, and I told him I had. Every one of them. He nodded at that, but it didn't seem to matter to him. I didn't want to say too much. Standing there in daylight, with trash bins at the curb and school buses running somewhere farther down the road, the words sounded worse in my head than they had in the house. Chair, knocking, wet towel, a rule about rooms. I watched Bruce's face and tried to decide what would make him walk back inside. I found a notebook behind the sofa, I told him. His eyes moved to the house and stayed there. His mouth tightened. He shifted the mail from one hand to the other, slower than before, like he needed a second to think. Then somebody before you wanted you to last longer than they did, Bruce said. I didn't like how he said last. Not stay, not make it. Last. He started walking toward his garage, and for a second I thought he was done. Then he stopped near the driveway and waited without looking back. I followed, keeping a few feet between us. He set his mug on top of a low brick wall by the garage and rubbed at his jaw. He told me he didn't know everything. He made sure to say that twice. He said most of what he knew came from watching people come and go, talking to a few of them when they were still willing to talk, and noticing what they were doing before they left. One man had been setting up the smaller bedroom for his mother. Bruce remembered a medical supply van dropping off rails for a bed, then coming back 2 days later to take them away. The man sold the house at a loss. Another buyer had a little girl who stayed with him on weekends after a divorce. Bruce saw him carrying in a pink plastic dresser and a mattress with cartoon sheets still in the package. Less than a week later, he dragged the same mattress back out to his truck, still wrapped, and left before the sale was even finalized. There had been a woman a few years before me who said her brother needed a place to stay while he got back on his feet. Bruce didn't know the full story. He only remembered seeing her unload boxes labeled with someone else's name. She was gone by the next Monday. The boxes went with her, but Bruce said she left the porch light on for 3 days before anybody came to turn it off. He didn't tell those stories like gossip. He kept looking at the pavement while he talked, towing at a crack in the driveway with one work boot. I asked him why nobody said anything before I bought it. He looked tired when I asked that, older than he'd looked by the mailbox. He said people do say things, but not in writing, and not to the wrong people. Realtors change. Sellers move. Neighbors get tired of sounding crazy. Buyers want a deal bad enough to ignore half a warning if the house looks clean and the inspection passes. I didn't have much to say to that because it sounded too much like me. Bruce told me the lot hadn't always been a single house. Years back, before the remodels and the new siding and the small garage, there had been a low building on that property with rooms rented by the week. Nothing official looking, just cheap rooms for people who needed somewhere short-term. Shift workers, old men on fixed incomes, people between leases, people after divorces. He said part of the old structure came down, part of it got folded into later work, and after enough repairs and records and ownership changes, it became a private house. He didn't know which walls were old and which weren't. He said nobody around there really knew anymore. I asked him if he had ever been inside. He shook his head before I finished the question. After that, he picked up his mug, looked once more at my house, and went back toward his front door. I don't think he knew what the notebook meant. He only knew enough to stay away from the place. When I got back inside, the house looked the same as it had when I left. Hall light off, kitchen quiet, my tool bag still open near the living room outlet, the cardboard checklist still taped to the wall. I took the notebook to the kitchen table and looked at it properly for the first time. The 5 rules were on the first page, but I'd missed things because I'd been reading the words, not the page. The handwriting wasn't all the same. The first rule had a square, careful look to it. The second was darker and pressed harder into the paper. The third leaned upward like it had been written fast. The fourth had been written over something else. I could see older ink under parts of it where the words didn't line up. Rule 5 looked different from all of them. The letters were smaller, shakier. Whoever wrote it had gone back over the word ready until the paper was almost torn. I flipped through the rest of the notebook. Most of the pages were blank, but not clean blank. Some had pressure marks from writing that had been torn out. A few had scraps left near the spine where pages had been ripped away. On one page near the back, there was only half a sentence left at the top, cut off by a tear. I couldn't make enough of it to be useful. I held the notebook sideways under the kitchen light and watched the dents in the paper catch shadow. It was hard to think of it as a guide anymore. It was closer to the kind of notes people leave on equipment after something fails and almost hurts someone. Don't use this switch. Valve sticks. Breaker trips under load. The warning is there, but the full report is missing because nobody had the time or the nerve to write it all down. I set the notebook on the table and looked down the hall at the closed spare bedroom door. For the first time since I'd found it, I stopped thinking of the rules as instructions. They were pieces. Whoever left them hadn't left enough. By late afternoon on the 4th day, I had a duffel bag sitting by the front door and no real plan for it. I'd packed 2 shirts, socks, my charger, the notebook, and the folder with the house paperwork. Then I left the bag there and went back to tightening a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet because tightening a hinge was easier than admitting I was thinking about leaving. I hadn't called Monica. I hadn't called an inspector. I hadn't called my parents. Every time I looked toward the hall, I thought about the money already in the house. Down payment, inspection, closing costs, supplies, gas, time off work. I thought about my mother's hands on the kitchen sink in their rental place, always wiping the counter after it was already clean. I thought about my father standing up slow from the table and pretending he didn't need to push off with both hands. That house was supposed to fix at least one thing. My phone rang a little after 5 p.m. I was in the living room, coiling an extension cord the way I do at work, over the wrist and elbow, keeping it from twisting. My mother's name was on the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered, long enough to decide what my voice was supposed to sound like. She asked if I was eating. She asked if the heat worked. She asked if the neighborhood seemed quiet. I gave her short answers and kept walking while I talked, like moving around would keep the call normal. Behind her, my father coughed. It came through the phone small and rough, half covered like he'd turned away from the receiver. Same cough I'd heard my whole adult life. Same dry catch at the end. I stopped walking with one foot in the hallway and one in the living room. My mother kept talking over it, telling him to drink some water. I stared down the hall at the spare bedroom door. "So when do we get to see it?" my mother asked. "Soon," I said. "I just need to finish the room." I wished I hadn't said room. She told me not to wear myself out. I said I wouldn't. She told me my father wanted to know if the driveway was wide enough for his truck. I told her it was. We stayed on the phone another minute, maybe less. Then she had to go check something on the stove. After the call ended, I stood there with the phone still against my ear until the screen went dark. The spare bedroom door was closed. I knew it was closed. I had checked it before packing the duffel. I had checked it again before tightening the cabinet hinge. Still, I walked down the hall and stopped outside it. I didn't open it right away. The smell came first. Pain cream. Stronger than before. The bottle I'd bought was still in the store bag. I could picture it without looking. White cap, blue label, safety seal intact. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't set it on the table. I hadn't used it. Under that was another smell, faint but familiar. Old bar soap, the kind my mother kept wrapped in its paper until the last sliver was gone. It didn't belong in that room, but my brain placed it fast. Their bathroom sink, their towel rack, the little plastic cup my father used for rinsing after brushing his teeth. I put my hand on the doorknob, then took it off. The notebook was on the kitchen table. I went back and got it. I didn't read every rule. I knew where my eyes were going before the page was open. Don't make a room ready for someone who hasn't stepped inside yet. I looked at that line until the words stopped being words for a second. Then I shut the notebook and carried it with me. The house stayed quiet until after dark. I didn't work anymore. I sat on the air mattress with my boots on and a flashlight in my lap. The hall light was on. The spare bedroom door stayed closed. I watched the thin line of light under it because that was easier than watching the door itself. Around 10:30 p.m., the line under the door changed. At first, I thought the bulb in the hall had flickered. Then I saw the shadow move from inside the room, blocking the light low along the floor. Something had passed close to the door on the other side. I stayed seated. A few minutes later, I heard water touch glass. One small clink, then another. I got up without meaning to. The notebook slid from my knee onto the floor. I left it there and walked to the hallway. The spare bedroom door was still closed, but the smell had gotten thicker. Pain cream, soap, damp cotton. The kind of air you get in a room where older people have already gone to bed and left a bathroom light on. I leaned toward the door, not touching it. A cough came from inside. It was my father's cough, down to the dry catch at the end. My hand found the doorknob again. The room made another small sound, fabric shifting over fabric. Then something soft bumped the floor. A slipper, maybe. I could see it in my head before I saw anything for real. Slippers under the bed, towels folded over a chair, two pillows pressed down where heads had been. My fingers tightened around the knob. From inside the room, my mother's voice called through the door. "Jacob, leave the hall light on," my mother called. I didn't move. She had said that to me before. Plenty of times. Back at their rental when my father had to get up at night and the hallway was too dark. Leave the hall light on. Don't make him trip over the rug. Don't shut it all the way. The door was closed between us, and I still turned my head toward the hall switch like a trained response. Oh, God. I knew enough by then to know it wasn't her. Knowing didn't stop the rest of me. My hand stayed on the knob. My thumb shifted against the brass. I could feel the latch through the metal. There was another cough from inside, then the quiet scrape of a glass being set down on the folding table. I looked down at the notebook on the floor behind me, open where it had fallen. From where I stood, I couldn't read most of the page. I could read the last line. Don't make a room ready for someone who hasn't stepped inside yet. I let go of the knob. My hand didn't drop right away. It stayed in the air beside the door, like I was still holding on to something. Then I stepped back, one foot, then another, until my shoulder touched the opposite wall. From behind the door came the same small household sounds: cloth settling, floorboard easing, a faint tap from glass against wood. I had spent 4 days making that room ready. I had measured space beside the bed for my father. I had cleared a drawer for my mother. I had bought the blanket, the glasses, the pain cream. I had stood in that hallway and told her exactly what I was doing. I hadn't understood the rule when I first read it. Standing outside that door, listening to my mother's voice come from a room she had never entered, I understood enough to keep my hand off the knob. I backed away from the spare bedroom door and picked the notebook up off the floor. I took it to the kitchen and set it flat under the overhead light, the way I would with a bad work order I couldn't afford to misread. The last rule was the one my eyes kept finding. Don't make a room ready for someone who hasn't stepped inside yet. Until that night, I had treated the other rules like warnings about an old house with something stuck inside it. Don't sleep in the wrong room. Don't touch old things. Don't answer the knocking. Don't check a changed room twice. They gave me tasks. They gave me a way to behave. The fifth one was different. It was about what I was doing to the room. I looked back at the top of the page. Don't sleep in a room you haven't cleaned yourself. I had treated that like a normal safety habit. In maintenance, you don't trust a space you haven't checked. You don't work in a mechanical room until you know what's powered, what's leaking, what's hanging loose above you. Clean the room, clear it, claim it. But the spare bedroom had never been mine. I had been careful about my own room. I'd cleaned it twice. I'd checked the closet and baseboards and outlets. The spare room, though, I had treated like a project for somebody else. I had never really made it safe for me. I had made it ready for them. That difference started to matter. The line under it had coffee dust rubbed into the edge of the paper. If you find something in the house that isn't yours, don't use it and don't put it where it looks like it belongs. The chair, the towel, the things that showed up in places where they made sense. The house wasn't throwing objects at me or hiding them in corners. It was placing them where a person would naturally accept them. A chair by the table, a damp towel near a bedroom, slippers under a bed. If I used them or moved them into a better place, I would be helping. I would be agreeing with the setup. I looked toward the hallway. The kitchen light didn't reach all the way down, but I could see the bottom of the spare bedroom door from where I sat. The line of hall light under it was thin and steady. Behind that door, a floorboard shifted. I made myself stay at the table. After midnight, don't answer knocking from inside the walls. I had thought the knocking wanted to scare me or get me to open something. A knock means someone wants a response. That's normal enough that you don't think before reacting. You hear it, you ask who's there. But maybe that was the point. It didn't need me to open the wall. It needed me to answer, to prove somebody in the house was listening, to give it a back and forth. The next line had been written over older ink. If a room looks different from the way you left it, close the door and don't check it twice. I'd been using that like a reset. Close it, leave it alone, let it settle. But the wording didn't say the room would go back. It only told me not to check twice. Looking once told me a room had changed. Looking again was something else. It was inspection, confirmation, the kind of second look you take before signing off a job because the first look wasn't enough. The house had been asking me for that too. Check the room, see the chair, see the towel, see the pillows, compare it to what you left. Decide it is real enough to work around. Then my eyes went back to the last rule. Don't make a room ready for someone who hasn't stepped inside yet. The words on the page looked newer than the rest. Shaky, smaller, pressed hard enough that the paper had dents. Whoever added it had understood something the others had only worked around. My father coughed from inside the spare bedroom. I didn't move this time. I sat with both hands flat on the kitchen table and listened to the cough finish. It was the same dry catch I'd heard over the phone that afternoon. The same one I'd heard at my parents' table after dinner, when my father would turn his head and pretend it was nothing. The house hadn't had that cough before the call. I thought about what I had brought inside. 2 pillows, a blanket, the pain cream, aspirin, 2 glasses. I thought about the folding table placed close enough to reach from the bed, the clear drawer, the hallway light left on because my mother had said that kind of thing for years. I thought about the sentence I had said out loud while standing outside that room. I'm getting your room ready. I hadn't just cleaned. I had labeled the space. The old rental rooms Bruce told me about came back in a different way. All those temporary rooms, all those people coming and going, all those beds made for whoever could pay another week. Workers, older tenants, divorced people, people waiting for something better. Rooms set up for strangers, rooms emptied fast, belongings left behind, a chair here, a towel there, a pair of slippers nobody came back for. I don't know what a house can learn. I don't know if learn is even the right word. I only know that place had taken the act of making room for somebody and turned it into a process. Empty space, object, habit, response, confirmation. It hadn't been trying to get into the room. It had been trying to finish it. The spare bedroom door clicked, just the latch moving at first. I stood up because sitting still had become worse than walking. The notebook stayed open on the table. I took the flashlight from the counter, but I didn't turn it on. The hall light was enough. The door had opened about an inch. Pain cream hit me first, stronger than before. Under it was old soap and damp cloth. Then I heard the small clink of glass against wood. I stepped close enough to see through the gap. The room had changed again. The 2 pillows were on the bed frame with dents in them now, shallow but clear, like heads had rested there for more than a few minutes. The blanket was pulled up smooth on one side and wrinkled on the other. A pair of slippers sat under the edge of the bed, toes pointed out. The damp white towel hung over the back of the wooden chair, the same chair that had vanished before. On the folding table were 2 glasses of water, one closer to the bed, one closer to the chair. The pain cream was open. I could see the cap on the table. I had never broken the seal. From somewhere inside the room, my mother's voice made a low sound, not a full word. The kind of tired sound she made when she was getting up from a chair. Then my father coughed again. I pushed the door open wider with the tips of my fingers. I shouldn't have. I know that. I had the rule right there in my head. Don't check it twice. But I was past the point where closing the door and waiting felt like a plan. If I was going to get my parents clear of that house, I needed to know what the room had become. The room had arranged itself around 2 people who had never been there. The room was empty of bodies, but every object had settled into a place that made it feel occupied. The chair was turned toward the bed. The table had been pulled slightly closer. The drawer I had cleaned was open 3 inches, and inside I could see folded cloth that I hadn't put there. A man's voice came from the bed. "You did good, son," my father said. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo. It sounded like he was tired and trying to be kind. That almost did it. I had to put one hand on the door frame because my weight shifted forward before I meant it to. The room offered me the exact thing I had wanted from the start. My parents safe, resting, using the space I had worked for. My father proud without making a speech about it. My mother close enough to ask for the hall light. I looked at the 2 glasses, then the open pain cream, then the dents in the pillows. My parents had never stepped inside. Everything in that room had come from me. My money, my hands, my phone call, my memory, my need to make a place for them before I could even admit how tired I was. I pulled my hand off the frame. "You don't get them." The voice in the room didn't answer. The floor near the bed gave one small creak, then settled. That was all. I backed into the hallway and kept my eyes on the floor until I reached the kitchen. If my real parents ever came through that front door, the house wouldn't have to guess anymore. It wouldn't have to work from a cough on a phone call or a bottle of pain cream or the way I arranged two pillows. It would have the originals, and I had filled in enough for it to start. I went back to the kitchen and got two contractor bags from the box under the sink. My first thought was to get everything out of the spare bedroom before I lost the nerve to do it. I didn't have a better plan than that. At work, when something starts feeding a failure, you cut the feed. You shut off water, kill power, close the valve, pull the load off the bad circuit. That room was the part I had to cut loose. I put one bag on the hallway floor and kept the other in my hand. The spare bedroom door was still open a few inches. I pushed it wider with my boot, not my hand. The room smelled like pain cream and damp towels. The chair was still by the table. The two glasses were still there. The pillows still had those shallow dents in them. I moved fast because slow would have given me time to think. I grabbed the pillows first and shoved them into the bag. The blanket came next. It dragged against the bed frame, and for a second it pulled back like it had caught on something. I yanked harder and got it loose. I took the damp towel off the chair without looking at it too long. The slippers under the bed went in after that. They were heavier than they looked, and I didn't check why. The two glasses were on the table. I picked up the one closest to the chair and poured it onto the floor. Then I did the same with the one by the bed. Water spread across the laminate and ran toward the low spot near the wall. I didn't care. I put both glasses in the bag with the rest. The pain cream was open, cap sitting beside it. I threw both pieces in. Aspirin, plastic store bags, the folded paper towels from the drawer, the little things I'd bought without thinking too hard about them. All of it went into the trash bag. From behind me, my father coughed. Closer this time. I kept tying the bag. My mother called my name from inside the room. It came from near the bed, low and tired, like she didn't want to wake anyone. The hall light flickered once, then steadied. I picked up the bag, dragged it into the hallway, and didn't turn around. Another glass rolled across the floor behind me. Glass on laminate. Slow at first, then a soft bump against the baseboard. I kept walking. The first bag went out the front door and onto the lawn. I came back for the second one. By then, the spare bedroom door had moved almost shut, leaving only a crack. I used the broom handle to push it the rest of the way from the hall. It clicked. Something on the other side touched the door once, light enough that I felt it more in the broom handle than heard it. I took the second bag from the hallway, added the notebook to my duffel instead of throwing it away, and carried everything out to my truck. I didn't sleep in the house again. I sat in the driver's seat until morning with the doors locked and the keys in my hand. A few times I looked at the windows. Once, around 4 a.m., the hall light came on by itself. I watched the strip of yellow sit under the front blinds until sunrise washed it out. In daylight, the house looked stupidly normal. Patchy lawn, sagging gutter, my trash bag sitting by the porch like I'd cleaned out a closet and got tired halfway through. I went back inside only long enough to get my tools, the folder with the paperwork, my air mattress, and the charger I'd left in the bedroom. I didn't open the spare bedroom. At 8:37 a.m., I called Monica from the driveway. "I need to sell it," I told Monica, "as fast as you can." She was quiet for a second, then asked if something had happened with the inspection, the neighbors, or the financing. I told her it was a family issue and that I didn't want to get into it. She asked how fast I wanted to move, whether I'd accept a loss, and if I wanted to list it as is. I said yes before she finished asking. I spent that day moving what little I had brought into a long-term motel on the west side, the kind with a weekly rate and a kitchenette that smelled faintly like old cooking oil no matter how clean it looked. It had a bed, a small table, a bathroom fan that rattled, and a front door with a chain lock. That was enough. I didn't tell my parents. For 3 days, I let my mother's calls go to voicemail until I could answer without sounding like I was sitting in a parking lot with my hands shaking. When I finally picked up, I was in the motel room, standing by the sink with the water running so I'd have something to do. She asked about the listing first. Then she asked about the repairs. Then she got to the things she really wanted to ask. "When can we move in?" my mother asked. I looked at the motel table. One glass sat there, half full. Mine. I had taken it from the cabinet myself. "There's a paperwork issue," I said. "I'll tell you when it's fixed." I hated how easy the lie sounded. She believed it because it sounded boring. Paperwork, legal issues, delays, normal problems. Problems people understand. A few nights later, I woke up at 2 a.m. The motel room was dark except for the microwave clock and the thin light around the curtains. The heater under the window clicked, ran for a few seconds, then stopped. I lay still, listening the way I had learned to listen in that house. Then my father coughed from the living room area. Dry, short, familiar. "Dad." I got out of bed too fast and hit my shin on the corner of the frame. I didn't stop. I crossed the room, flipped on the lamp, and looked toward the table. No one was there. The chain was still on the door. The deadbolt was turned. The bathroom was empty. The cabinet doors were closed. On the table were 2 glasses of water. One was mine, half finished before I went to sleep. The other sat across from it, near the empty chair. I stood there looking at the second glass, with the motel room door still locked behind me and no one else inside. For a while, I told myself I had carried something out of that house. Then I started wondering if that was wrong. Maybe it had followed me, or maybe it had never really lived in the house at all. Maybe it started the moment I made room for someone I loved.